In the autumn of 1907, the heart of American finance, Wall Street, was carrying on with its usual bustle. Banks were opening the credit taps, investors were closely following stocks, and the United States was being pointed to as one of the world's fastest-growing industrial economies. But behind this lively facade lay serious structural problems that had left the financial system fragile. At the time, America had no central bank. There was no central institution to support the markets in a crisis, act as a lender of last resort to banks, or calm financial panic. The banking system was made up of thousands of independent banks, alongside rapidly growing trust companies that also took deposits and played an important role in the financial markets. However, these institutions held lower cash reserves compared to national banks, which left them far more vulnerable to sudden outflows of cash. Another development that fueled the system's fragility was the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. In its aftermath, European insurance companies were forced to send large amounts of gold to the United States to cover claims. This drained liquidity in international money markets, pushed interest rates upward, and left the American financial system more exposed to unexpected shocks. It was in this environment that, in October 1907, a failed stock speculation would shake the confidence not just of a handful of investors but of the entire American financial system. In a short span of time, long lines would form outside banks, the New York Stock Exchange would come to the brink of closing, and John Pierpont Morgan, the country's most powerful financier, would become the central figure of the crisis despite holding no official position whatsoever. Today, economic historians agree that the panic of 1907 was not just a major banking panic, but one of the most important turning points that accelerated the path toward modern American central banking. The event that triggered the crisis in October 1907 was a failed market speculation attempt involving shares of a mining company called United Copper Company. Behind the operation were F. Augustus Hines, a businessman who had made his fortune in mining in Montana, and his brother Otto Hines. The Hines brothers believed they controlled the majority of the company's shares and planned to corner investors who had sold the stock short. Their goal was to seize control of the shares in the market and then force short sellers to buy shares back at high prices. This strategy, known in financial history as a short squeeze, would have driven the share price up rapidly if successfully executed. The plan was set in motion on October 14, 1907. In the early hours, United Copper shares did indeed rise sharply as planned. But Hines had failed to account for one fact: there were far more shares available in the market than he had estimated, and the short sellers were able to obtain the shares they needed from other sources. The expected price squeeze never materialized. As a result, contrary to what had been planned, the stock lost value rapidly within a matter of hours. The scheme had failed, and Hines's financial reputation was seriously damaged. The real danger, however, only came to light after that. Investors knew that Hines was not merely a mining investor. He held significant stakes in a number of banks and financial institutions. If Hines's finances were in trouble, the institutions connected to him could be at risk too. This concern quickly turned into a crisis of confidence. Mercantile National Bank, where Hines served in management, was forced to remove him from his position under public pressure. Attention then turned to another financier, Charles W. Morse, who also had close ties to numerous banks and trust companies. Newspaper reports and rumors circulating on Wall Street further heightened investor anxiety. The panic soon spread to one of New York's largest trust companies, Knickerbocker Trust Company. With roughly $68 million in assets, it was one of the country's largest financial institutions and played an important role in the financial system of the era. A pivotal development occurred on October 21. National Bank of Commerce announced it would stop clearing transactions on Knickerbocker's behalf. The market interpreted this decision as a serious warning about the trust company's reliability. The next morning, thousands of people lined up outside Knickerbocker Trust's branches, intent on withdrawing their money. Millions of dollars were pulled from accounts within hours. The company could no longer meet the surging demand and was forced to suspend operations. Knickerbocker's collapse set off a domino effect, spreading the panic from a single institution to the entire financial system. People could no longer tell which banks were safe. Depositors rushed from one bank to the next, and confidence in the financial system eroded rapidly. It was at this breaking point that the man who would change America's fate stepped in. John Pierpont Morgan. With Knickerbocker Trust's suspension of operations, panic gripped all of New York. As confidence evaporated, people rushed to withdraw their deposits from banks. The problem was no longer confined to a single financial institution, it had spread to the entire country's financial system. At the time, the government had no strong mechanism in place to manage such a crisis. The Treasury Department had limited capacity, and the United States still had no central bank. As a result, the markets turned not to official authorities but to Wall Street's most influential banker. John Pierpont Morgan, though nearly 70 years old, was unquestionably one of the most powerful figures in American finance. Over the years he had restructured railroad companies, financed major industrial mergers, and become the man who restored market confidence during previous crises. But the responsibility he took on in the autumn of 1907 would prove to be the most defining task of his career. Morgan set up a crisis command post in his famous library in New York. For days, bankers, trust company executives, and leading figures of the financial world gathered around this table. Balance sheets were examined, assets were assessed, and efforts were made to determine which institutions were merely facing a temporary liquidity shortage and which were genuinely insolvent. Morgan's approach was highly strategic. He did not attempt to save every institution. His guiding principle was this: if an institution's assets were sound and it was only experiencing a cash shortage due to a temporary crisis of confidence, it deserved support. But he believed that propping up institutions whose finances were fundamentally broken and which had lost solvency would only cause greater damage to the system. One of the most critical moments of the crisis came on October 24, 1907. Brokerage firms on the New York Stock Exchange needed short-term financing to keep their daily operations running. Liquidity in the money market had nearly dried up completely. If the necessary financing could not be secured, trading on the exchange would grind to a halt and the panic in the markets would deepen further. Morgan persuaded New York's leading bankers to act together. The resulting meetings produced roughly $25 million in emergency credit for brokerage firms. This support allowed the New York Stock Exchange to keep operating and prevented the financial system from freezing up entirely. In the days that followed, similar support was extended to other financial institutions. Coordinated by the New York Clearing House, cooperation among banks was established, and confidence in the market slowly began to return. After weeks of intense effort, the panic was brought under control. But what had happened revealed a very important truth. The fate of the American economy could not, and should not, be left in the hands of a single private banker. The panic of 1907 was successfully brought under control within weeks. But both politicians and the business world drew an important lesson from what had unfolded during the crisis: the financial stability of one of the world's most powerful economies could not be left to the initiative of a single private banker. The U.S. Congress passed the Aldrich-Vreeland Act in 1908. This law allowed for the provision of temporary liquidity to banks during emergencies, and it also called for the creation of the National Monetary Commission to reassess the American banking system. The commission studied Europe's leading central banks in an effort to build a more resilient financial system for the United States. One of the key steps in this process was a meeting held in 1910 on Jekyll Island, off the coast of Georgia. Senator Nelson W. Aldrich, banker Paul Warburg, and other leading financial experts of the era gathered there to draft one of the first comprehensive blueprints for a new central banking system. Although the meeting was long portrayed as a mysterious affair, historians generally agree that it was not a secret power-sharing arrangement but rather preparation for a comprehensive banking reform. Following political debate and various revisions, the Federal Reserve Act was passed on December 23, 1913. With it, the United States established a modern central banking system operating nationwide. The Federal Reserve was a new institution tasked with supplying liquidity to banks, serving as lender of last resort during financial crises, and managing monetary policy. The very system whose absence had been felt most acutely in 1907 had finally taken official form. John Pierpont Morgan did not live to see the founding of the Federal Reserve. He died in March 1913, just 9 months before the law was passed. Yet according to many economic historians, his greatest legacy was not that he single-handedly saved Wall Street, but that he showed the entire country that such a responsibility should never again rest on the shoulders of one man. Today, the Federal Reserve's interest rate decisions affect not only the United States but global capital flows, currency markets, and the world economy as a whole. For this reason, the Panic of 1907 is regarded not simply as a financial crisis of the past, but as a defining historical turning point in the formation of modern central banking. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the Stock Market Historian channel. We'll continue exploring the stories that have shaped the history of the stock market together.